how do you make travel fun? Because it is hard. If you've run a campaign where the players have traveled for a long distance, it's pretty easy to get into the routine where every day is essentially you wake up, you eat your meal, mark off a ration, you walk all day, and maybe there's a random encounter in the middle of the day, which is great. I mean, that makes it better. But you have your random encounter, and then you finish the day, you go to sleep, and then it's again. And it really just turns into a random encounter slog, where you spend 14 days rolling on a random encounters table, and then eventually you get there. Which is fine, to be clear, but it's not great. Um, so the reason I'm thinking about this is because a friend of mine, he's running an icebreaker campaign. And that is the players are going to be on this icebreaking ship traveling up through the north. And for the most part, it's really just a travel campaign. It's all they're doing. It's traveling north. They're trying to find, a secret passage through the north. And he's going to be using the RPG system that I wrote, Heartrush, and was wondering about how to make the travel and the survival aspects of it more interesting. And made me realize I don't really have great travel rules, and of course many games have no travel rules at all. You don't need good travel rules, but having a good framework is pretty nice for making games run more smoothly. It makes it so the GM has to do less work in order to make the game fun. So yesterday, I spent pretty much all day writing travel rules. And I've done some research. There are some great games that do travel quite well. You should look up Forbidden Lands, for example. And taken from what I've seen in that, taken from what I know as a player, taken from what I know as a GM, and I've put together some rules for travel that I think you'd like. And these are specific to Heartrush, which is, some random RPG system that no one's ever heard of, but they're pretty easily adapted to any RPG system that you use for your group. So the way these travel rules would work, you've got a couple of phases. There's a travel phase and there's a camp phase. And when you're in travel phase, you're on the move. And when you're in a camp phase, you're probably foraging for food or sleeping. Each of these phases can last any amount of time. And this is so that the GM can pace the travel accordingly. If the players are going through a route that they've been through 1,000 times before, maybe the entire trip is just one travel phase. Yeah, they sleep during that time, but let's just compress it all into one giant travel phase. However, if the players are going through a really harsh, desolate location where every hour is grueling and miserable, maybe there are travel and camp phases throughout the day, or, 2 during the day and then ending with a camp phase. Any sort of combination of these things is totally viable and is up to you as the GM. The idea here is that during each of these phases, players get actions. So when you're in a travel phase, you get one travel action, and then when you're in the camp phase, you get one action per period of time that you spend in camp phase. And I'll get into that in a bit. When you travel, there are a couple different actions you can take. You can forage for food, you can hunt, you can navigate, you can captain if you're like on a ship, for example. Someone needs to be in charge of running the ship. You can take a lookout, you can entertain. All these different options. Of course, you can only choose one. So now we've got the players presented with an interesting decision, because each one of these things comes with pros and cons. You gather wood or you hunt. There'll be chances to get food, but it comes with the opportunity cost of not taking a lookout, or not entertaining, which keeps morale up, or not navigating. So ideally, everyone's going to kind of figure out, oh, this is what I'm best at, this is what I should be doing. Of course, each one of these things, each one of these actions has some specific rules that can add to your story. So for example, I'm pretty proud of this one. When you travel and you take the lookout action, this is something you can do during travel or during the camp phase. I write, you keep watch while moving or explore the surroundings around your camp. You make a cunning check, which is like a wisdom check if you're playing D&D. A wisdom check against the challenge number, the DC, the challenge number for your environment. On a success, you see or hear any threats as soon as they become visible or audible. If you beat the number by 4 or more, you spot something interesting while searching. That's pretty open-ended, but this is mainly for the GM. So if someone's taking the lookout, if they hit their number, based off of how challenging it is to keep watching the location you're at, if they hit the number that they're trying to hit, they automatically get to see any threats that they should be able to see. However, if they get above that, then they spot something interesting. And what that interesting thing is totally up to you as the GM. Maybe it's like something that's kind of a threat as well as something interesting. Or it could be, they spot a temple in the distance, they spot a funny looking bird. But whatever it is a hook that both you and the player know is going to be interesting. The player is going to be intrigued because they're like, oh, I just procced my ability. I get to find something interesting. When the GM describes this thing I see, I know it's going to be worth investigating more. And you as the GM now have this opportunity to quite naturally inject story into the travel. So when the player rolls a really high lookout check, you say, oh yes, well, there's nothing dangerous or no threats to see today. However, while traveling, you see strange paw prints going through the snow, heading towards a cave you see in the distance. Not something that they would naturally just find. It's not a random encounter you roll on the table exactly, but it creates story. And now the player's like, okay, well, I know this is going to be interesting. It's not just random tracks I see while traveling. It's like, no, these are interesting tracks. So that's one action. And of course, players all have a decision to make because looking out seems like a cool thing to do. You're going to find more interesting stuff as you travel. But again, it comes at the cost of not doing some of these other things. So if your players have run out of food and they really need to forage or hunt, well, maybe you want to put a few people on that. You can only take one action. So if you need a lot of food, well, maybe not everyone's going to succeed at foraging or succeed at hunting. So maybe you put multiple people on foraging hunting. Maybe you've got tons of food. So you're like, okay, we don't care about keeping our rations up at all. We're all going to be on the lookout so we have more chances to spot more interesting things. For camp actions, the idea is that for each quarter of the day, and you can measure this however you want, but the idea is that for each period of time of day, and I've split the day into quarters, so morning, afternoon, evening, and night. But for each quarter of the day that you spend in the camp phase, you get to do a camp action. One of the camp actions is sleep. So ideally, most people are going to spend 2 or 3 quarters of the day on the move and during the travel phase, and then they're going to take a camp action to sleep. They don't have to stop for the evening. They could just stop for the night and immediately just take the sleep camp action, and go straight to sleep. But if you want to be able to forage or hunt or do some other things with a few bonuses because you're not on the move anymore, or if you want to be able to gather wood for a fire or entertain or repair your ship or vehicle or whatever you're on, these are all things that require you to be stationary. And since you can only do one camp action per period of time, you probably want to take a second camp action or a second phase of the day, a second period of the day to spend it in the camp phase. Altogether, and I'll share the specific rules in the description below the YouTube video. But the combination of these things, I think, will mean that players will, 1, have interesting decisions to make during the game. 2, these interesting decisions will be well paced. It's terrible when you have to make the same boring decision over and over and over again and nothing happens, which can be the case if you try to make a 14-day routine trip, something where you're using all the complex travel rules and you make them decide every single morning when there's no actual meaningful output. So again, you just compress that into one giant travel phase. 3, I think the rules will instigate a lot of interesting story. There are some rules for navigation, so how to get, what happens if you get lost and that sort of stuff. When you hunt, you can hunt for whatever you want, and it doesn't guarantee you kill the thing, it just means that you find it. So voila, you now have story of encounters with the wild animals. As a GM, you can put in whatever animal you want there. The hunting action only guarantees that you find an animal that matches your environment. So again, creating more story out of the player actions, which is exactly what we want. So yeah, highly encourage you to check them out. I've written them up decently, I think. They're going to get some more refinement as we go. But yeah, absolutely check them out. If you want advice on how to convert them into something that can be used for D&D, I'm more than happy to. Just leave something in the comments and I'll see what I can do. There you go.